Hi folks, welcome back to Cretacea Park, and this time we'll be getting to the king, headed for a Tyrannosaurus exhibit. We're going to start though with a platform here that is technically in the Edmontosaurus exhibit. You can see the platform and the ramp up to it is already in place, and now I'm building the support for it with the girders and getting those all in place and setting it up by starting with a series of the three, getting them squared away, and then I will be duplicating those several times across the width of the platform. Um, yeah, it's slow work, but it usually pays off once you get things lined up nicely. Um, and there's the cross girder that will be part of that duplication, trying to get it squared up too. Um, Start with the other side and then set the ones in the middle. These would be anchored in the rock, and yes, there are some of them hanging out there in midair, but I'll be fixing that by bringing in some more rock for them. But first I need to do the cross pieces for the girders, get them set up and squared away, get all the outside ones, because nobody's going to see the ones in the middle, so I really don't need those showing up. Uh, and But I have to have them the right length so that they fill the space, and get all the sides squared up. And with that in place, I can start putting the trim around the platform itself so it looks less like a glorified piece of plywood. And I'm using the solid metal column for that, sized to length. Um, get it duplicated and run it down to the other side, and then turn it 90 degrees and catch the long side first, and then duplicate it, run it down, shorten it for either side of the ramp. The ramp will need attention as well, of course, obviously. Um, so that looks pretty good. And except for that length, yeah. Okay. And now work on the edge of the ramp, grabbing one of the longer pieces and getting the angle right and running it down into the ground. And that means it's time to bring the rock out to anchor those little orphan flying in the air girders, and sinking it down into the rock, and hopefully that will be tall enough to keep animals from messing with those girders. I was building this while I was working on the Edmontosaurus exhibit, and my focus was there, so I decided to trim out the rocks a little bit and blend them in a bit more with the environment. It seemed a reasonable thing to do at the time. The bridge that you can see on the right is in a very rudimentary state, and that will change pretty significantly. You can see the fence underneath it, where the guests can't see it, but it still defines the space. So you can see I sort of decided I wanted a taller rock there to keep the animals out. A little bit of surface painting in order to blend things in, and also set up a planting ground, which ended up being 4 rocks right here at the viewing ramp. Fiddling around with those till I'm happy, and leaving a little bit of planting space, because the hard rocks are just not the right feel. But keeping the same plants that are coming down the side, which is arrowwood, I believe. And having to fix a rock from the original layout, get it off the path, because I guess we'll try to walk right over it, which is not what I really want them doing. So having finished up the vegetation work, it's time to work on the actual structure on the viewing platform. I want it mostly glass. I don't want it as tall as the 4-meter glass. But before changing its size, I want to make sure all the pieces are squared up and have the right offset and are all happy with each other. And then select them all, drop it down to a more reasonable height. And it looks like I'm pulling them up, but that's a setup because I'm going to turn that into something else. Or I was going to turn it into something else. I realized it really didn't do what I wanted it to do. Because what I want is venting. Since this is going to be completely closed in a tropical environment, it's going to be necessary to not turn it into a sweat box. So using the favorite slat walls there to do that job. Minimal pieces by stretching it out on the short ends and then stretching it out again for the one long wall, because the texture doesn't distort too badly when you do that, and it saves on pieces, which is a useful thing in the long run for your game running well on your computer, unless you've got some kind of monster. Obviously, it's going to need a roof. And so we get back to it, select it so we can get back into the group and make a little adjustment that I noticed in the hiatus between these two scenes. And pick the roof and start getting it into place. Very straightforward, ultimately a hip roof, although not made with the hip roof pieces. And now it's eaves. Very good. And I'm going to do something else because I want to improve the venting again. And this time I did use the hip roof pieces to set them at the top with a standoff. And I'm going to go back to the slat wall pieces to represent additional passive venting in this roof, starting this time with the long side and making sure it doesn't show on top and it sits reasonably set in from the eave that I will make as part of the hip roof piece rather than putting on a separate eave piece. So got to get my end piece to the right size so I can duplicate it and haul it over and finish that 4-piece set. The one other thing I want to do is I'm going to use a window, and I'm going to put it up there at the bottom of that slat wall. It's going to help disguise the fact that I don't have a true opening there. But it also will ultimately, when these things actually emit light, it will serve as a lighting for this this platform. And yeah, I think it's simple. It's starting to look good. I need one more element, and that's something to keep the guests from being right up against the glass. It may not have any real effect on whether the guests go through the glass, because you don't want the glass weak enough for them to break through anyway. But it will help with a lot of people's comfort levels, where they feel they have a safety factor there that keeps them from going right through that glass. Old monkey reflexes where, you can't see something solid, there isn't anything there, at least as long as it's clean. And who knows how clean it would stay in a dinosaur park. I don't, for sure. So setting up the rail for all 4 sides of the box, and that's good. Ultimately, I'll need to put in some kind of info thing in there. But before that, and more importantly, I need a railing on the ramp. And that has to be at an angle. and probably make it with 2 pieces. Yeah, 2 pieces. Because of needing to conceal the slanted supports for it at the top and bottom. That's just not something you see much in the real world. So I'll bring in a metal column to hide the obvious slantedness of it, and duplicate it over. And now I've got 2 tall columns, and that gives me an excellent opportunity for a signboard, or at least an archway effect to set this space off from the path. And I'll use the slat wall to keep it in design aesthetic with the venting on this platform. I would love to recolor the black metal into something more bucolic, at least the above support area, but not just yet. So on to the bridge. I mean, we said this was getting to the king in the title for this thing, and that means the bridge needs to be finished. So this has a taller glass fence in those holes, so it becomes a place the guests can see out, and it's too tall for them to get over and kill themselves falling into the exhibit. So took the same arch, turned it 90 degrees, and now I'm setting it up to be the entrance for what will be a covered bridge. And that will provide views into the Edmontosaurus exhibit on one side and off to unfinished zoo area on the other, and provide a transitional space into the tyrant lizard's territory. Now, this time I decided to use the hip roof piece for the roof because this is a much bigger roof and I wanted to keep the count down. I could have done the same thing on the platform and probably should have in the long run, but hey, this is learning how to do things, and that includes grabbing the correct slanted wall for the hip roof piece, which is not necessarily the one adjacent to it. So setting up the eaves for it this time, because I want a little bit wider roof, and then bringing its length, all the pieces together, so I can adjust its length and its width without duplicating it, preferably. And you'll notice the slope of the roof changes as it gets wider, and actually I kind of like that. So stretch it out and take a little bit of it back up, not quite to the full, or maybe it is to the full, or a little past it, I don't know. Anyway, the roof is on now, and it's time to do some spiff up for its approach, and that will involve this concrete wall. Again, there's dangerous areas here we don't want guests to get through, so we have to fence them off from it. And doing the concrete to play with the texture on the bridge and make that part of, make it all of a piece. So you can see me playing with a little bit of sizing on that little stub wall there so I can get a good angle to follow the path line and get that that arrowwood bush walled off. Wouldn't want anyone of our guests to be attacked by the arrowwood bush. So I want a coping on top. This time I'm going to use the metal column because it contrasts well with the concrete, and also it will play into the little viewing building. And I suspect ultimately I will decide it should be colored to match whatever I do with the viewing building's columns. Because you can see right there, they actually touch and therefore are connected. And having them be the same color, I think here will play well. In other places the contrast might work, but right now anyway, I'm thinking that matching is better than contrasting. When the time comes, I may change my mind. And only time will tell on that. So obviously the other side's going to need attention as well, and having done the one side, I can use pieces to get a head start on that by dragging them over and making the accommodations I need on this side to keep guests away from the exhibit or falling down into the separator. Obviously we don't want that. As with a lot of my other previous videos, there were some issues in getting recordings made, or they didn't work out, or I forgot. So we're going to have a transition in a moment, and rather than finishing this out, we're going to jump to making the main Tyrannosaurus viewing thing. And I've made a structure with all the pieces at their sizes except for the height of the metal pieces. Having made that, I'm going to pull the whole thing up with the embiggening tool until it's the size I want for it to sit in this environment. And you can see the Tyrannosaurus sitting out there. So I really want the Tyrannosaurus to be able to look in here. So getting that height is important. The fence is still there. That'll go away. And I got to get the height so that the floor is good and clean above the terrain. And I'm going to pull the dome up because that will help me set the roof. That fencing will eventually be going away. I had a couple of fits and starts at getting the roof the way I wanted. You can see me setting up 2 roof panels here. I'm still having fussy issues with getting the circular duplications done and in place. This time I used a column as a centerpiece, and it goes a long way to making it easier to duplicate in a circle. And you can see me starting over again, setting the column up first and having it in the center of the building as defined by that dome, which was built on the grid, and resetting the intended roofs pieces, turning them around and trying to get them in the right place so that they will duplicate nicely and sit in the right place. The perspective makes it trickier than it looks, you see that when I pull it down, and I didn't quite get it far enough. Because these guys are not wanting to play on the grid for me at the moment, getting them the correct distances out there was challenging, shall we say? That's a nice word to cover up the cussing. So what I wanted to do was do the duplication thing, and as is often the case, you end up with a patterning on your roof because of that, and that looks pretty good. And you'll see later that in the course of doing this, I managed to duplicate a whole bunch of pieces, which was a pain in the butt later. And I have duplicated a second roof here because I've got an aesthetic scheme in mind here. And what I'm trying to do now is collect just the top pieces, right? And you can see I widened it and brought it down so that it's more or less touching the dome. And now it isn't quite what I wanted. Now I'm trying to get rid of extra pieces, and you can see I left holes, and it was a pain in the butt to get that all straightened out. So I'm going to speed this up shortly so you don't have to sit through all of the pain of pulling out all these extra pieces and replacing the ones I inadvertently pulled out. But the whole problem of this multi-duplication is an issue for people who have something less than really muscly computers that don't care how many pieces you have, which is pretty much most people. So you want to keep your piece count down when you can, and keep your frame rate up, because life is just more pleasant that way. So in filling in the pieces, I tried to keep ahead of the game and get rid of extra pieces when I created them, because it's much easier to duplicate across the dome and do the rotation to make sure it rotates in the right place, and then get rid of the excess pieces. It's more clicks, but less frustrating. So the roof looks about done now, and I'm going to select the top part and then adjust it to the height I want with that slight standoff of the two roofs. Imagine a heat venting system under the cover of the roof there. And now get the dome to its final size, duplicate it, because I want more segments. And this time using 30 degrees, we have those more segments. And that'll be a skylight for the interior. And the glass also got multi-duplicated because I had wanted to have more uprights. And ultimately I decided that that wasn't the answer. You can see how it blurs everything behind it. And that's an effect I think can be useful at some point. But I ultimately decided that it blurred it too much, even though it clearly said this glass is thicker than normal, which is perhaps something you'd want with a Tyrannosaur, being able to stick its head up into it. When I placed the building, I saw that you could actually see the fencing that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. And the idea here is ultimately there will be two pens so that the male and female can be separated, Tyrannosaurs being solitary, except when you want to breed them. So there needs to be a gate to get one animal into the other enclosure. And it may ultimately turn out, possibly as a zookeeper, a way to let them swap habitats for periodic enrichment. So you're watching me go through a process of finding those extra glass pieces and getting down to essentially one pane of glass and all of that, pulling them out and getting rid of them. You see that I had turned one of them into concrete for the back side of the viewing pavilion, and I will get around to filling that one hole over there on the back side. I want to keep the one near the path open because that will be the entrance. So it proved to be a little bit of a trick to get this lined up because it wasn't part and parcel of what I was doing. It could have been worse, and it didn't need to be perfect, so it got done. You can see the sunlight coming through that skylight, and it'll light the inside of that pretty nicely for most of a day. The decided to look too plain and decided to bring in vertical elements, which solved my issue about dividing up the glass into more segments, as it turns out. So I didn't need to have gone through all that extra glass if I had just decided to have these things in the first place. And maybe I'll think about that ahead of time the next time and try to incorporate them into my segments as I duplicate them and turn them around. That would have saved a little bit of work, and not a ton, because to make the original building, there were only the 4 segments to make the circle. And that would have left me with just the 4 posts. But I could, as you can see me doing here, duplicate them as a set of 4 and spin them around to fill in and get those 30-degree segments. I decided that I'd leave this kind of looking architect artsy, but then I had to deal with the heavily duplicated column in the center that I used, and I have no idea how many of these things I ended up duplicating to get down to one but there were a lot of them. And there's got to be a better way. And eventually I suppose I will find it and adopt it. But get it down to one and bring it up because I want it sticking out of the center. And the one I got needed some centering. Yeah. And then I decided, you know, I need a little something else up there at the top. So I brought in a round window and made it a little bit thicker. All those struts need to anchor into something. And it will provide a little bit of a light beacon when night comes to Prehistoric Kingdom. So I took the two uprights to either side of the doorway, adjusted them slightly, made them a little deeper, and that would be the opening. And we cut away now to the restroom that I brought up into this area because scary animals may encourage people to visit it. And I decided to make this blend into the local environment by cladding it as if it's set in the hillside. So working with rocks to make it look like it's set into the hillside. Yeah, you know, it's a little theme parky, but I decided to go with it anyway. And once I get the rocks in, I, you know, need to work with the environment around it to add some, you know, guidance areas, and ultimately I need to wall it off so people don't go wandering through. They may eventually get to go through when I get around to the second Tyrannosaur paddock on the far side there, and if and when I'll come back and do something about the rocks here that become the barrier to keep guests from getting over to that side of the area. With the rocks in place, it's time to think about the plantings in the area, which of course will also mean some adjustments to the ground painting. I've already got some plants in there, obviously, but I need more to make it look right. This is, I think, going to have a little bit more formal planting. Oh, I've got 3 oak trees there. They have to go away. There's only supposed to be 1. That's much better. And now they're not. That one was hanging down a little bit low, so we'll bring in a modular one, bring it up, and I'll get a much better height here so guests can pass under that. There's still a lovely shading area, so we want shade-loving plants in here, and foxglove is good for that. And I'm going to line the path with this bright foxglove, the white helping define the path. Yeah, and a little bit of extra planting. So behind it, I need something a little bit taller, also preferably things that like the shade, because I want to fill in this whole area and make it one of the more formal planting areas of the park, and size some of the larger plants to different sizes. And I want to do something similar on the opposite side of the path. So put in some goldenrod to bring color again, but not have it be the same as the other side. So the viewing pavilion is going to need some signage. Some I can put in now for the exhibit, and ultimately more for when you need to inform your guests about your visitors and stuff. I haven't done anything on the inside of this pavilion this time, partly because I'm thinking about what I want to do with it, partially because of time to do this build. So, you know, there's only so much that can happen in a video. And one of those things is speedy letter build again, uh, putting in the name of our beast in this exhibit. Uh, and of course the original letters are way too big to fit on that much space. And now that I have all of the letters for the animal's name, I can duplicate them and make some adjustments to make sure the sizes all work and are more or less the same, and get everything in there. And it's still a little big. So, and guys are sticking out a little further than some of the other guys. So get those fiddled with, get it centered, and then it is the king, right? So you got to get his Latin kingly name in there. Yeah, looking good. Obviously, I need some more work on the path environment. Bring in some rocks on the unfinished side, the non-habitat side, and try and spiff that up a little bit. I think one of the video chunks that got lost was putting in the concrete wall on the habitat side. You can see it in these pictures. And now bringing in some benches, again, facing the habitat side, so the resting guests have a chance for seeing something interesting, possibly. Yeah, there's that concrete wall, and more benches, more trash cans, because we got to take care of our tired and messy guests. Obviously not fully planted there. Start by putting in my faux mulch ground painting, and do a little bit of more planting to finish things off. Decided to bring in some, I think those are Scots pines, get some more evergreens into this environment, and some low plantings, some high plantings, filling in mulch. Oops, that's a little chunk of path that needs to be worked with to get the smoothness off the bridge. And I can see a gap in that ramp that needs to be fixed just a little. And for the aesthetics, right? So now return to a little bit slower speed to spin around and look at how the approach to the king's kingdom looks. I'm liking the bucolic aspect of coming along this path, and I can see guests in the distance headed this way. This will be a new area for them to come out to, since in the previous build it didn't get beyond the bridge. And now one of the other things I did was duplicate that viewing platform from the Edmontosaurus side and set up a similar one here with the Tyrannosaurs. So we have sort of an echo of a castle with two turrets and a long great hall here. And we drop down and get the view in the great hall. So yeah, little fast zoom there. But to the right, the Edmontosaurus exhibit, and to the left, the undeveloped part of the park, and straight on till Tyrannosaurs. But that's as far as we're going today. We're about at the usual time limit. This is Dino Bob. Thanks for dropping by. Subscribe if you want to. Like it if you thought it was worth looking at. And I'll see you in another video. I think I'll go join her up there on the platform and look at the Tyrannosaurs.